Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very empowering show coming right up with special guest Jason-Kendrick, and he's here today to share with us his new books, It's Not Your Life, It's You. Now, Jason is a communications and transformation specialist, author, speaker, Reiki master, heart-core communications trainer, and heart-centered living practitioner. He offers himself to the world in love and service to cultivate peace, love, and joy within all his works. So let's welcome to the show, Jason-Kendrick.
Thank you very much for having me, Marianne.
What an honor it is to have you here and to talk about your new book. I mean, you have to be very excited as an author because I know these are always such a journey.
Oh yeah, I don't know what it's like to have a child, but I think I have a better idea after doing a couple books.
That perspective may change later. Yeah. Well, why don't you share with us what inspired you to write this book?
This was kind of part and parcel of my own journey, and as my life has progressed, this book was very much as I began to on my own journey of self-discovery. I very much became aware of how perspective was very much a powerful part of our life creation, or just how we see the world. And I wrote this book under the guise of really exposing the power of perspective. Our lives, our perspective is really what colors, what filters, what gives us the what's the word I'm looking for? I think, filter probably, but what really colors our lives? I mean, if you have a victim mentality, if you have a victim perspective, then your life comes through the filter of victimhood. And if you have a hero perspective or a creative perspective, or something like that, that colors your life. And so this was very much the antithesis, or the genesis of what brought me around to writing this book. And it very much wrote itself. It was a pretty quick process in the writing. Publishing took a little longer.
Mm-hmm. It's always kind of the case. Well, and it's interesting when you talk about perspective, and I want you to kind of dive into that a little bit more here in a minute, but when you talk about perspective and people having, let's say they kind of have this victim mentality and how that kind of colors their life, do you feel that that's something that they can also be taught? Maybe their parents had it, their grandparents. It's kind of something from a generational aspect that's kind of pushed down through the generations as far as a mindset's concerned.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's very systemic in Western culture, especially American culture, that there's it's almost an accepted and taught, handed down perspective that we're all a victim of something. And you see it quite a bit at misery loves company, as it were. And we are just kind of taught that we're a victim of society, or we're a victim of our parents, or we're a victim of school, and what happens, and what was my experience going through childhood and early adulthood with this mentality, was that you just give your power away. There's when you're a victim, and when you believe you're a victim to X, Y, and Z, you basically say that, well, I have no power because I'm a victim of this, this, and this. And the synopsis basically of this book is really looking at your life from a point of choice, whether you want to believe it or not, whether you're even ready to look at your life in that way, just playing with the idea that maybe I chose this, maybe I chose these parents, maybe I chose this environment. And by looking at it from a point of choice, you can say, well, what did I learn from it? What did I gain from it? What are the strengths, and what can I take from this experience and pass on to others? And that's really the core nugget and genesis of the book, is looking at your life from a point of choice, whether it's a choice of parents or environment, or whatever the case may be. It's really looking at your life that maybe I chose to have these experiences. What has it taught me? What are the strengths that I've gained from it? What are the lessons I've gained from it? And how can I use that to positively impact my life and other lives in the world?
I think a lot of people, when they hear, I chose my parents, I chose this life, I chose to have these difficulties, are probably, if they're not in a certain standpoint, they're kind of stepping back a little bit and going, I really, I didn't choose the abuse. I didn't choose the dysfunctional family. I didn't choose all these things. So how do they move from a place of, you're telling me this is what I chose, to being more in power?
Well, and there's always one of the linchpins of this kind of philosophy is that looking at your life from a point of choice, and that choice may not be a physical 3D conscious choice. It may have been a spiritual choice. It may have been a life path choice. And even when it comes to one of the examples in the book is one of my mother's best friends who suffered ungodly abuse in a cult-like atmosphere growing up. And it took her quite a while to get to the place of looking at it from a higher perspective and realizing that because of that abuse and because of the trauma she suffered and the things that she gained from that, she's a great healer now, very intuitive, and much of that would not have been, come to her had she not experienced what she experienced because of what she gained from, the tools and the strengths and the different things she gained from going through that. And looking at her life from a spiritual perspective like that, it makes it much more palatable and easy to understand that, as an eternal spiritual being, I might choose to experience these horrors because I know at a core level that I'm eternal and I'm, this isn't, these dangers or these horrors or whatever I experience are not really a threat to me. It's about the experience. And through that experience, we gain knowledge and wisdom and, strength. And it's all about growth. And, I look at it sometimes from a kind of comedic perspective, and I put it in the book as well, that if you almost look at your life as this physical life is I'm in my avatar, I'm playing a game, or I'm here, in my choose your own adventure. And I've chosen to have these experiences. I've chosen to have this challenges and trials to gain wisdom from it, to gain knowledge from it, to have the experience of it. And that's, my mother uses my books in her practice in the prison system in Texas to help some of the, inmates to look at their life from a different perspective, because that's a very depressive kind of victim mentality a lot of times once you're in prison or once you're locked up or you're incarcerated like that. You feel like there's nothing, you have no power. And she's had some success with, some of the inmates look at it like, well, okay, well, I chose these things. When in one facet or another, I'm responsible. And I can also choose now to better myself or look at my life from a place of power. Whereas before it was from a place of weakness and victimhood. And so it sometimes is a struggle. I know there's lots of folks who have gone through quite a lot of abuse and trauma as children. And it's very difficult to say, well, I didn't choose that as a child. And I'm not saying at any conscious level we choose any of these trials or tribulations. However, if we can entertain the idea that maybe at some level we did choose it, then it allows us the opportunity to glean some power back, to take our power back and say, okay, well, at some level I chose this. Why did I choose it? What did I gain from it? And how can I use this to improve my life and better my life versus being a victim of it?
Now, in your book, you talk about the power of perspective. And is this what you mean, that there's the ability to then really kind of stand in your mastery and say, hey, I'm making choices for my life. I came here to experience different things, to have different lessons, to grow in different ways. And, it's all about shifting that perspective.
Absolutely. I firmly believe that the one main thing that we have the most control over in our life is how we perceive things, what lens we look through. If we decide to use the rose-colored glasses versus the dark, lenses, we have the ability to just choose our own filter, our own perspective, our own way of looking at the world, and for our betterment or our betterment or our detriment. And that's the one thing I think we have the most control over, and it's very empowering to look at your life through an empowered perspective. And it's very disempowering, if you're looking at your life through a victimhood or disempowered perspective. And it colors everything. I mean, our brains are really a focusing device. If you're ever driving down the road and you're hungry and you notice all of the restaurants and fast food places will be highlighted. It's like your brain highlights those things and, brings them out into focus because you're hungry, and it'll gray out everything else. You won't notice the car dealerships and other stores and things. You only notice places where there's food. And that's in a lot of ways how our brain works with, the power of perspective. It is, what is the filter I'm using? Am I looking at the world through an empowered perspective, or am I looking at the world through a defeated victimhood perspective? And that will color everything we experience. It is. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I would say it is just I want to say easiest, but as I'm sure we're all aware, it is not always easy to shift our perspective because of the emotional attachments and the feelings we have. However, it is one thing that we can consciously do. We can stop ourselves and take a breath and say, I choose to see this differently. And that is why, starting with my first book, It's Not Your Life, It's You, Layman's Guide to Power Perspective, onto the ones I'm working on now, which are really about communication. It's this gradual path that I've taken on my own, realizing that the greatest thing we can express and teach is our own perspective, and then to be open to somebody else's perspective and to realize that in our own perspective, we're all correct. Most arguments in my experience, especially working with couples in our practice, is they're arguing over who's right. I'm right and you're wrong. However, because of their unique perspectives, they're both right. They both feel what they feel. They both believe what they believe because of their perspective. And so being able to calmly communicate and share from a space of love each person's perspective, their unique perspective, and then to understand where they're coming from. Because most of our perspectives are really colored by past experiences, our childhood woundings, all these different things. And understanding those things that color our perspective is really a powerful tool in relationship, in life. One of the things that I've adopted from Tony Robbins is that the quality of your communication equals the quality of your relationships, which equals the quality of your life. And our perspectives really color all of our communication and all of our, how we think and see and experience the world. And so this book is really a journey down the rabbit hole of perspective. It's looking at your life through, well, maybe I did choose this, and whether I believe I did or not, or whether I want to believe I did or not, if I did, why, and how can I use this to my betterment versus my detriment?
I think being able to really view things in that light puts everything in such a profound way, because then it's, there's lessons to be learned here. What are things that are benefiting me and my life and my journey, as opposed to, oh gosh, the mean boss is picking on me, or these things are happening.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, that's all perspective as well. It's are you a victim of the mean boss, or is he struggling with his own stuff? And, is he just doing the best he can? Are you doing the best you can? How are we perceiving these interactions? Are we going to be the victim of somebody else, or are we going to look at it as, well, maybe they're doing their best and trying to get the best out of me, and, looking at it from a more positive perspective.
Yeah, it's really interesting because most people are really only focused on their own experience. So to be able to look at things in a way where you're really getting into how other people are perceiving things, the possibilities there, opens up, I think, a lot. And I think having your next books in regards to communication will really dovetail nicely with this book.
Yeah, it was very interesting in my own journey of writing the first two books on power perspective, and then the third book, is the working title is The Deception of Duality, and it's just a kind of my conversational take on our oneness as spiritual beings and whatnot. And then the newest book is really about the masculine feminine dynamics. And what I'm finding really interesting about the whole journey, starting with the power perspective, is that all of our unique perspectives, if we learn to communicate them more graciously and a little more openly, and even show some vulnerability, especially in relationships, it takes a lot of the drama and trauma out of the blame game, which tends to happen. You did this to me, or you're not doing this for me, or whatever tends to be the arguments. It's really, I perceive this. I perceive you're not doing this for me, or perceive you're treating me a certain way, or I perceive these things. And, my perspective is this versus your perspective is that. And I see a lot of the couples I've had the honor to work with find a lot of ease and comfort and almost relaxation come over their relationships when they start to communicate in this way of, well, I'm perceiving this, or the story I'm telling myself is this. And I'm really starting to become an advocate for, I love Brene Brown and all her work on shame, because I think vulnerability, those are the things that actually bring us together. I've seen a lot of couples who have been together for years and years and years, who either through conscious choice or just trial and error have gotten to a place of really loving their partner's woundings, the things that were our trials and tribulations and scars from childhood or growing up. Those wounds are really the special sauce, if you will, of each person. And in those particular relationships, as they've gone over the years and learned to open up and be vulnerable and share their vulnerabilities, those jagged edges become the things that they can latch onto. And it's the latching onto and sharing of those vulnerabilities and loving those vulnerabilities of the partner that really gives a strong foundation to the relationship. And understanding the beauty and the power of actually sharing your unique perspective in a way that isn't challenging, but is in more of a open, sharing, vulnerable way, and then giving your partner, your family member, the opportunity to share their perspective and their woundings and their different things in that same open way takes a lot of the blame out of a lot of the conflict I see. And so starting with yourself and starting with your own perspective and going, okay, well, this is my perspective. Why? Why do I think this way? Why do I see things this way? What is it related to? And then sharing those things. I see a lot of trauma and drama within interpersonal relationship because we don't realize that not everybody thinks the way we do, but we don't tell them how we think, and it's this awareness piece of, well, this is my perspective. This is how I think. And I think this way because of these experiences. And I would like to share that with my partner or my family members or whoever, my friends, so they can understand me better. Because I think the biggest thing we're missing in this world is, we're all desperate for connection. And we're also all terrified of being vulnerable. So I love a lot of the work that's coming out now that is really about sharing and sharing our own unique perspective, sharing our own unique vulnerabilities and being strong, that strength that comes from opening up and sharing those things with somebody else.
I think most people forget how much strength comes from being vulnerable. I mean, they think, oh, you're going to be weak, without really realizing it takes great courage to do that.
It definitely does. I'm have been running a couple men's groups over the past couple of years, really under the guise of showing men they're not alone and teaching them really how to hold space again, to learn to hold space for men together, and then to take that skill back to their relationships. Because one of the basic traits of masculinity, and one of the things I think we've been missing for quite a while now, I've been kind of trained out of, is the ability to hold space, to kind of hold that container for their partner and to be able to share their perspective in that way. And it's one of the two biggest fears of the masculine and feminine. For feminine, a lot of times it's body image, and this comes from a lot of Brene Brown's work. But for men, it's just basically don't be perceived as weak. And we've got this belief system, or we've been trained into thinking that being vulnerable is weakness. Although in my work in the military and with a lot of the special ops guys that I've talked to, you cannot be courageous and brave without being vulnerable. You cannot be in these situations without showing vulnerability, without actually showing up that way and being brave and courageous, which is really interesting because I think it's pretty common that we all have the same experience of watching somebody get up on stage in front of a bunch of people, be vulnerable and share their heart. And we all just go, wow, that is so brave. But then as soon as we think that I want to do that, or somebody says we should do that, it's like, oh, no, I can't do that. And I believe it's because of that, we perceive it as weakness, or we have this fear of, I know in my experience, I had this fear of being judged or attacked or mistreated in some way or really misunderstood. But I mean, unfortunately, that's the chance we take. And some people, but not everybody's going to understand us. Although taking that chance and sharing our perspective in a open, vulnerable way really empowers everyone else. And so it's probably the bravest thing we can do. And I think the first thing we have to do is become aware of our own perspective and do that inner work to become aware of ourselves. Because I believe, I know in my experience for many, many years, I was basically sleepwalking, walking around unconscious and just reacting to the world. And doing the power perspective work and looking at my life through a perspective of choice and saying, well, if I hadn't had my experiences with my father and my family and growing up in a Southern military family where intimacy and open communication were not only not priority, they weren't really on the list. It would not have given me this drive to be a better communicator, to share and teach communication, to share this perspective, the power perspective with others, had I not had those experiences. And so I believe for all of us, that's the first step is our own self-awareness and then sharing that. And as we share, we empower others, and then we find that connection that we're all looking for, the understanding, the community. But and fortunately or unfortunately, it always starts with number one. It's an inside job.
When did you realize that there were other perspectives besides yours, and it was kind of like your aha moment that made that shift for you?
I, unfortunately, I always knew there were other perspectives besides my own because of the family kind of dynamic. Growing up in that Southern military-esque dynamic, my perspective wasn't really honored or listened to very much. It was very much, just kind of my father's is my way or the highway sort of perspective. And so I was always very aware that there were other perspectives other than mine. What took me quite a while to realize, I think it was probably when I was close to 30, was the victim perspective. I think a lot of us go through that in teenage years and young adulthood. We feel like we're a victim of our family or our parents. And it took me a while to get to that place of saying, well, am I? Am I really a victim, or is this just the stories I've told myself? And if I told myself these stories, and maybe I can tell myself a new story. And it's not always easy. It's you have to develop those new neural pathways, just like you developed the first ones, which is repetition and repetition. Though it's much better to reprogram yourself with a story of your choosing versus a default story from childhood that maybe you were given or that you adopted from that egocentric childhood point of view of, well, it's all my fault. I think for a lot of us, there's the childhood story that does come from that childhood egocentric perspective. And we believe that whatever happened with our parents, whether they stayed together or divorced, is somehow our fault. And we take that with us. And I think really working on that perspective, changing that perspective, is one of the most freeing and empowering things. Realizing in that way, we're not a victim. Our parents are not a victim of us. We just, in our childish ignorance, created this story that no longer serves us. And changing that, which, it takes practice and it takes support, but it's so worth it.
Well, I know exactly what you mean. I went through my own portion where it's like, wow, there are different perspectives out there. What do other people think? What are they feeling? And then getting to that place where I can move beyond myself and any kind of victim mentality, because a lot of times your people are pretty self-focused. It's just a lot of times it's how we're raised, protect yourself, do these types of things. So it does take some out-of-the-box thinking to really look at a different perspective. In your book, you also talk about persistence, and I'd love for you to share a little bit about that and why that's important.
Well, I think the biggest reason persistence is important is because that's how we develop the habit, the neural pathways. If you study Dr. Joe Dispenza's work and neuroscience and epigenetics when it comes to just how our brains function, it's repetition. That's how we got in this mess in the first place. Was we grabbed a thought and kept repeating it until it became a belief. And so understanding how we develop our beliefs and that we can change them. And I think that's where really the persistence and the support is so valuable and necessary, because I know in my own experience, the less I reach out for support or the more isolated I am, the less progress I make in changing a thought process. It's too easy for that just to go back into that rote routine and that old thought paradigm. And so being persistent and having a support system, having a support group, as we get older, a lot of times what's our infrastructure of support tends to fall away. We're focused on paying bills and family, and we just kind of naturally isolate. And what I'm finding, especially through my men's group work, is we really need to have support groups, because we put too much pressure on our partners, for them to be everything for us. And that's too much to ask for one person. And so adopting a mentality of, well, it's good to have support. It's not weakness. It's actually healthy. And to seek that out, because within that support group, you can find accountability and partners to have those repetitions and those reps with, to help you change your mind. And you get to have another perspective. You get to learn from each other.
I completely agree with you, Jason. I think it's so important to dive into these beliefs and see why we have this belief system going on, why we're having this replay of maybe patterns that people are seeing within their lives. Unfortunately, we're at the end of our time today. Again, if you'd like to connect with Jason, you can at his website at jason-kendrick.com, and we'll have the link below. If you're looking to purchase his books, It's Not Your Life, It's You. They're available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. Jason's available also for speaking engagements and to work with people one-on-one through his coaching and hardcore communication training. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.